I think we'll just give everybody a minute to join as people are logging on, and then we'll get going. Okay, so good afternoon and welcome to ISG West Midlands virtual panel. It's great to see people dialing in from such a diverse list of businesses from right across the West Midlands and further afield. It all goes to show the magnitude of the decisions we all face over the coming months when it comes to ensuring the region emerges strongly from the current crisis. For those who don't know me, I'm Wayne Flannery, Regional Director for ISG's construction business based here in the Jewellery Quarter in Birmingham. We're a global construction specialist delivering places where people and businesses thrive. We're proud of our strong Midlands presence, working across both the public and private sector, delivering well-known projects such as the new £26 million new School of Architecture and Built Environments at the University of Wolverhampton. This afternoon we'll be discussing something very important, not just for the West Midlands, but for the whole UK economy. How the public and private sectors can work together with the construction industry to ensure the progress we've made over the last few years when it comes to regeneration stays on track. So before we kick off, a bit of housekeeping. We're recording this session and we'll make sure that it's sent to everybody who's registered. We will start with a panel discussion and then we'll open up the session to any questions you may have. Please submit these via the chat facility on the right of your screen. On to our guest this afternoon. I'm delighted to introduce our panellists. Andy Street, Mayor of the West Midlands Combined Authority since 2017. Andy is a former Managing Director of John Lewis and since becoming Mayor has been a huge advocate of the regeneration of the region and its potential for driving growth across the UK and the global stage. Anne Bentley, Global Board Director at Rider Levett Bucknall and a member of the Construction Leadership Council. Anne was appointed to the RLB Global Board in 2012 and is a recognised advocate of diversity in the construction industry and opening up opportunities to all sectors of society. Rob Groves, Regional Director with Argent. Rob has over 30 years experience in the residential, commercial, industrial sectors, as well as major public sector infrastructure across the West Midlands. He's currently working on Paradise Circus project, which is a joint venture with Birmingham City Council in the city centre. So to start, let's discuss the scale of the challenge we face. Andy, you were recently quoted as saying the West Midlands potentially faces one of the biggest challenges of all UK regions when it comes to recovering from the economic downturn. Could you give us an overview as to why that is and what role development and regeneration can play when it comes to mitigating the effects of COVID on the region's economy?
Yes, with pleasure. So sometimes I wish I hadn't said that, but I'm afraid it could well be true. So let me just explain that. Of course, the backdrop is that this region's economy, as your own briefing note says, was actually performing extremely well before the crash. And the real point to draw out is construction actually was the sector in the West Midlands economy that was performing best of all. In the last quarterly numbers, it was grown by about 4.5%. So we have to, and we'll come back to this, we have to get this sector back to the growth that it previously enjoyed. In terms of why that prediction was made, it's quite straightforward. It was a prediction. The facts haven't come out yet, but it was totally based, and it's not just my view, it's the view of all the sort of economic experts from the Treasury downwards. It's based on the composition of our economy against other areas of the country. And if you think about the things we are very good at, and then you think about the likely impact on them, it'll all make sense to everybody. So the three areas where we had extreme strengths but vulnerabilities are, of course, manufacturing, and you've seen the fall off there, particularly in automotive, and the numbers in April were really extreme, 99% reduction in cars sold in the UK. And then secondarily in business tourism, it's actually a huge part of our economy and the whole sort of hospitality piece that hangs off that. And if you think just simply about Birmingham's market share in the convention business, nearly 50%, again, you see the vulnerability straight away. And then the third sector, and this might be a little bit more surprising, is actually the HE sector, where we have a very well developed business. And in fact, they're very big customers of yours, our universities. 8% of our regional economy is from those universities. And if you just think of the whole international student piece, we're extremely vulnerable there. So it wasn't anything about the dynamism of the economy at all. It was simply that compositional effect that led us to be potentially the worst affected. Now, in terms of how the numbers are actually coming out, we don't actually have a regional GDP number yet. We saw the national GDP number minus 20% for the first main month of lockdown, but we do have the increase in claimant count and unemployment. And actually, encouragingly, our rate of increase in unemployment was quite substantially less than the national average. It might just be the early stages of it, but it hasn't come through quite as badly as we might have predicted yet. Having seen that, looking at that the other way, already the claimant count numbers are up to 1992 levels, and the prediction, particularly around youth unemployment, is that it will probably triple and be up to 1981 levels. So in simple terms, 4 decades of progress could be lost in just a few short weeks and months. So that's the scale of what we're up against. In terms of the role of regeneration and construction, I mean, it's vast. Very simply, it is vast. And that's why I was very keen to do this. If I just think about some of the things we're trying to do to make sure that construction can play it, and all the development functions that hang off it, of course, can play its role. First of all, is pressing on with the big public sector funded schemes that we've already got. And obviously the granddaddy of all of them was HS2. And you can probably imagine I was on the phone to Boris's team while he was in hospital saying, you've got to give the notice to proceed for phase 1. And I do think it was very significant that they did do that literally while Boris was off duty, because that is literally tens of billions of pounds of contracts predominantly focused on the West Midlands. There are smaller schemes, obviously, that other public sector funding bodies across the West Midlands are responsible for, our transport schemes, our education schemes, and we're pressing on with those. And then, of course, some of the really big industrial schemes as well, just to name a few of them: Coventry Gateway, I-54 extension, Phoenix 10, Peddymore. All of them actually, I think, will still be very attractive in the market, if you think particularly where the market was very hot before and probably has not cooled. And that's particularly around the logistics elements. Some of those, I think, will be very hot indeed. And you'll know that 1 or 2 of the sites we've got sort of earmarked for very big industrial developments that we've still got to win. And then, of course, there's the how we respond to this more generally. And the timing of this event is very good, because I'm just holding up, if colleagues can see it, the plan that we launched yesterday that we call our Recharge the West Midlands. People have said to me it's very audacious. It's about £3.2 billion we're looking for, and that's investing in new opportunities to leverage in the private sector over the next few years. But critically, some of the things we're looking for very quick decisions, and a really good example of that would be the acceleration in house building, which, as we all know, is a very quick way of getting people back into work and has the highest multiplier for driving the economy. So there's big elements around that, the brownfield regeneration, the retrofit proposals that you'll have seen in there, and your industry will be critical in terms of that as well. And there was also a big section in here about driving out the property redevelopment around the 2 HS2 stations. Long talked about, but we want to bring that forward as quickly as possible. And particularly for interchange, there were ideas about how we can do that faster than was previously planned. So not to run over my time, I should probably stop there, but hopefully it gives you an understanding of what we've worked out, and then the critical role your sector has to play in the bounce back.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. That's a great overview, and as you say, it demonstrates to us all how important our industry is in rebooting this post-pandemic economy. I'm going to open up the floor now with some questions. So Anne, if you don't mind, I'm going to direct the first one at you to kick off the discussion. Major strategic developments have been designed to significantly improve regional connectivity. In light of the changes COVID-19 is predicted to bring, what is now needed to drive long-term growth?
Sorry, schoolgirl error there. So first of all, yeah, thank you for inviting me to attend, and you know, thanks Andy, that was a great introduction. And you know, similarly, I'm to ISG. Although I'm a global director of Rider Levett Bucknall, my office is actually on Colmore Road, so I have a huge interest in terms of regional connectivity and what's going on here. I mean, I think there are a number of things, and the work that I've specifically been doing has been with the Construction Leadership Council. We've been working very closely with BEIS, the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, to really see what the kickstarters for the industry could be. And of course, the reason that BEIS are so interested in the industry is exactly as Andy said, that for every pound that's spent in construction, you get an almost 3 times multiplier in terms of economic activity in the region. And so, you know, construction is really important in these terms. And really, in terms of the recovery plan, I guess there's 2 or 3 absolutely critical things. The first thing is trying to create as much certainty as it is possible to create in a very uncertain time, because whether you're in the private sector or whether you're in the public sector, what everybody wants to start to do as quickly as possible is medium and long-term planning. The private sector needs to know, you know, where their income's going to come from, which sectors they should be investing in, you know, how they should be training their staff. And of course, the public sector needs to know where they're going to get the greatest bang for the buck, if you like, in terms of the relatively tight investment program that they'll have. So one of the very first things that has happened in terms of the recovery plan is government has published, or the infrastructure, the National Infrastructure Commission has published its forward plan, and I think that's £36 billion worth of construction work that has been published just last week. It's regionalised. That's not all, sadly, for the West Midlands. That is for the whole country. But nonetheless, the West Midlands is getting some significant elements of it. And that has a number of drivers. Some of the drivers are fairly obvious in terms of, as you said, regional connectivity, improving local connectivity, not just national connectivity, but also concentrating on educational schemes, bringing forward some of the investment that was already planned, but now actually giving it some specific dates rather than just future planning. And of course, the housing agenda, this is seen by government as really important and does feature in the plan quite markedly in terms of, again, as Andy said, you can get housing started relatively quickly so long as you've got the sites available. So really, in terms of the sort of work the CLC has been doing, it's very much concentrating on establishing as much certainty as we can. But there is a sort of quid pro quo, if you like, that, you know, there's a limit to how much the government can do, or indeed local authorities can do, without the active support and cooperation of the industry itself. And so the other areas of the plan are looking at productivity. So, you know, how can we make sure as service providers that, again, the money is well spent and we're getting the maximum possible out of it? And that also leads on to sort of changing dare I say, the professionalism of the industry, making sure that we're paying people on time, making sure that we have the right forms of contract, making sure that we're collaborating properly with each other, and making sure that we're probably a more transparent and equitable industry than perhaps we've sometimes seen to be. So, you know, 2 sides to the coin. Government are supporting investment in the regions, but really those of us that are practitioners have got to stand up and be counted and play our part too.
Thanks, Anne. Rob, is there anything that you'd like to add that from a private sector perspective?
I won't dwell on the last point that Anne said, because it's very dear to our heart. Then I say Carillion, and how much that actually cost us, and obviously something we've been preaching for a long time. So, but that's not for the topic for discussion today. But it definitely needs to change, and this is the opportunity to change, to ensure that the supply chain is supported. I think really just following on, without going really reflecting what Andy and Anne said, really, obviously HS2, the big strategic developments prior to the virus were absolutely key. And obviously, I think, but that also feeds into the smaller infrastructure projects as well, because the reality is that from a private sector perspective, we can't deliver those public sector, those infrastructure schemes, because unlike, dare I say, the Southeast, the viability is immensely challenging, because values of whether it's residential or commercial have gone up, but nowhere near to the level of the construction costs are done. So I think that public sector intervention is absolutely even more important, and the work that Andy and his team are doing in terms of the brownfield sites, regeneration, stimulating that residential growth, the work that the LEP are doing through, as an example, Paradise Circus, are going to be even more so important to actually bring forward the private sector investment. But it is a partnership. You know, it should not be an expectation. Me sitting here as a private sector developer, if you like, it shouldn't just be the public sector that's just there to write the checks out to deliver. You need the private sector to back it up. Now, whether that's down to the detail like we've got, not just on Paradise, but I'm sure on other schemes where we are underwriting that public sector debt and we are guaranteed to deliver those buildings. But it needs to feed in. You can't just sit there as a private sector developer, whether you're on a small plot or a big plot, and expect all these things to happen without your commitment. So you need to have private sector partners that actually take that long-term investment view that will actually deliver on the plate and not expect for a public sector to keep writing out checks, because that's going to be immensely challenging. So I think the key to this is going to be around those recycling of funds, the LEP type setup with the TIFs around funding and private sector underwrite. But even more now, we're going to need that support to be able to see that additional private sector support what the public sector are already doing.
Okay, thanks, Rob. I think a strong theme through that discussion is that we all want to see effective, efficient, and the very best use made of public money as we restore confidence in our region. And I think we'll expand a bit further on that in the next question. I know Andy's will be able to contribute to this based on what he said earlier, but Rob, if you could kick off. With investment under question in some sectors, how can the West Midlands continue to transition to a more sustainable built environment, including plans to meet the UK's net zero carbon targets?
Well, I think we're all conscious of the current event, but when you're looking at developments across, and you've got to look at long term, and you know, what we must not do is lose sight of the environmental impact that we're all contributing towards, if you like. So from our perspective, no matter what, we are still, you know, our next generation of buildings, which we're just starting to look at now, we are looking at the whole net zero. Now, there are opportunities there because we're talking about a whole, as Anne will know, a whole different technology in many ways. And the UK is not particularly great at catching up on that, both from an approval process, you know, of the challenges of getting building control or fire or insurance companies to sign off much more use of timber. But so I think we need to bring that forward. But I think for us, it's a no-brainer. We are making that commitment to net zero. We need the support of different types of construction to be able to do that, because we're talking about a whole different concept of building. You know, much more use of sustainable sources, much more use of local sources, which will help the Midlands if we can provide those sort of materials. I think the other factor here is that the businesses that are maybe on this call, but across the whole of the region, recognising that most businesses, and our businesses like this, and I'm sure ours is the same, we are driving forward from a HR perspective, an expectation that we are going to be working in buildings, offices, if you like, that are going to have a much better sustainable credentials, and that's essential. Now, there has to be a recognition, and people may have heard me say similar things before, that costs money. And at the moment, it is a small price to pay. So for us to take our next generation of buildings forward, it is going to be a higher capital cost of actually introducing those new technologies. So I think there's an education to, and this is less of a challenge in the South East, and it comes back to that point about value. You need to recognise if your business is truly committed to delivering a sustainable future for your employees that are now driving forward that we want to be in a sustainable building, not just running it, but building it, then you're going to need to pay more money. It's as simple as that. It's not a plead. It's saying it's a reality check. It's saying these things cost money. In the scheme of running a professional service, if that's what we're talking about, it's peanuts. But in terms of us being able to deliver that, now we are committed because we have the benefit of long-term pension funding. So we're looking at that long-term impact. There's massive support from our fund to drive forward all of their stock, whether it's existing stock, new stock, to meet those carbon targets and if not to exceed. but we do need that support. We need that from all businesses to recognise is that you've got to work with us. But dare I say, and the challenges on all of this, and I'm sure Anne's coming across this, is we need to let the rest of the industry catch up, the BCO, the insurance companies. You know, we want to build buildings out of timber, but then insurance companies won't insure it. You know, I mean, those are the sort of challenges we face, which are a national issue. But from the Midlands, I think it's a great opportunity to use its manufacturing skills and skill set to see whether that can then work with that sustainable building environment going forward. Thanks, Rob.
Andy, it's great to see that you've set the bar very high here in the West Midlands in terms of the investment that you're asking for and the carbon targets that you've set. I think you've set the West Midlands to hit their targets by 2041, 9 years ahead of the national target.
That's correct. Some people still tell me that's too slow, but to be very honest, looking at the scale of what's got to be achieved, I think that's a real push. And I think it's very easy to set a target. The hard thing to do is to deliver a plan to make it happen. That's very much in my mind at the moment. But let me just say one or two things about what's been said. Do you mind if I just chuck one other thought in before we come to this particular question? Because I think Rob hit a very important point on the previous question that's worth just drawing out. We can find a few really optimistic parts of the market, which are basically where the public sector's put all the cash on the table, HS2 being the obvious example. But the really difficult thing is seeing how some of our town centre regeneration projects are going to go forward, given what's happening with the retail market. And I mean, there are various different answers to what is the new role of the town centre. I know all that's in play, but the bit I wanted to pull out is we are going to need to move to more models like the enterprise zone model. It doesn't have to be an exact copy of that, but there has to be a way that new funding is brought into that. Otherwise, I genuinely fear that one of the outcomes of COVID will be a sort of setting in aspect of declining town centres. Not necessarily the city centre in Birmingham, because obviously the values there are better, but in our smaller town centres, it is a real challenge, the economics of that development. So we're going to need to think laterally about the models there. And I just want to draw that point out because I think everyone's going to have to contribute slightly differently to that, frankly. In terms of the sustainability point, I mean, there's lots that we can contribute here. The most obvious is obviously the greening of our automotive industry. It's still the only real world-class sector in the West Midlands, and we have got to make sure that it competes in a green way. And that's why one of the things I am slightly obsessed with is this battery technology piece to come in, because that will end up being the core of the value chain in automotive, and nothing could be greener than that. Frankly, I think the move back to car after the pandemic, we all understand why it's necessary, but it just sticks in my throat to say don't use public transport. I haven't changed my view on that one bit. We have got to get back to city regions being dependent on public transport, and that is utterly consistent with the environmental target. So watch this space. And then, as Rob kindly drew out, the brown, not green development for housing, what could be a better environmental piece than that? I mean, it's just so blindingly obvious. And then, of course, and there's a whole piece about sustainability of communities where they've been blighted by dereliction as well, in a very different sense of the word sustainability. And then, as we just said, and I won't go over it all again, the retrofit piece, that's critical, because if you look at our energy efficiency, our housing stock in this country is deeply inefficient compared to other countries. And we aren't going to build our way of new homes out of that. You have got to go back and tackle existing. And then, of course, as we've just heard, it also then comes to using our manufacturing expertise to actually change our methods of construction, and the whole sort of notion of the passive home comes into view as well. So actually, things might not be billed as about the 2041 target, but lots of the core activity is contributing to that.
That's great, Andy. I'll move on to some of this leads nicely into our next question, and there's a lot of discussion and a lot of articles around remote working. So, Rob, I'll probably aim this one at you again to start off with. The question is, with some larger businesses rumoured to be considering an increase in remote working, what impact could this have on the region's built environments?
Thanks, Wayne. Yeah, I mean, I saw some articles 2 months ago. The office is dead. Sitting in a very stuffy study today. I wouldn't agree with that, to be honest. No, I mean, I think We're obviously in the short-term impact about what's going on with the current virus, but again, I think it is short-term and people will react. And my view is, as humans, in 18 months' time, we'll have moved on and hopefully, be in a much better situation. I think what it's done is accelerate what we already saw, but accelerate very quickly. Obviously, technology, and I'm not a technology expert, but obviously the whole use like we're using today, massively accelerated. But I think what it has done, it's brought those businesses that were, dare I say, lagging behind other businesses that were already there. And I'm sure if Matt Hammond was on the phone, he wouldn't mind me suggesting PwC is a good example, that already had a significant element of remote working. So, when you look at, for example, the space that they've taken at Paradise, it is, number of heads they have allocated that building is far in excess of the number of desks they have. So I think what will happen is you'll see this remote working accelerated, but there's no doubt from my own experience, and we've been back in the office part-time now for the last 2 weeks, an office environment, if it's set up properly, is the best place to be for a good part of the week, because actually that's when you get the best out of people. So for us, when you come back to that PwC example, we've seen it down our King's Cross development as well. Yes, I think people will take less space in terms of office requirement. And we're seeing that not just with PwC, we're seeing that with DLA Piper, with the space and other tenants that we're talking to on the remaining building that's a part of phase 1. But actually, the quality of the environment they're going to work in needs to be significantly different to what a lot of people have out there now. And what I'm talking about, getting away from the mass production factory, open plan, rows and rows of white desks, people all just crammed in. That doesn't create the best engagement of people and social interaction, which is what you benefit from being from a professional service. You get the best out of people if you create the right environment. So the quality of that space needs to be paramount, and more money, in simple terms, not necessary for all, can create a great environment. Equally, it needs to be an attractor. Because what is it that makes you move from your home, wherever that may be, to actually come to that place and feel really great? And that's about obviously the environment which your company creates for you, but it's also the city centre. Is it a great place? Is the public crown great? Is it clean? Have you got great restaurants, great cafes? All that sort of thing is going to be, that built environment is so essential, because it means that you feel you actually want to stay in after work. You actually want to go into your place of work, because even if you have a great office environment, you might want to get out and spill out into those additional spaces. So I think office isn't dead. It's just accelerated, I think, what we were already seeing, and people paying catch up.
That's great, Rob. Anne, would you like to offer a view on that, please?
Yeah, I think we have definitely seen a change in behaviours that I think will be sustained to some extent. I think that coronavirus has allowed people to behave differently, and I would be surprised if some of those patterns don't remain. And what I mean by that is it's now allowed people to sort of admit that they have responsibilities beyond simply being in the office. They might have childcare responsibilities or other care responsibilities. They might have long commutes that they wouldn't really talk about before, because it sort of seemed like they weren't somehow committed. It's allowing people to go, do you actually need me at the meeting, or can I just phone in? And so it's actually, I think, promoted a sort of confidence in employees that I think will remain. So I think we will definitely see a change, and I agree with Rob. I think it will be much more about quality rather than quantity. But I think there are one or two regional implications as well that could serve the West Midlands quite well.
That's right.
One of the bits of evidence we've already seen in some of the sort of schemes we've been asked to look at is people sort of saying, well, rather than our staff all going into one big office, maybe we should create some regional hubs, for example. So some smaller offices in some of the regional town centres rather than London, if I'm honest, or Manchester or wherever. The second thing we've also seen, and this is more from our own staff surveys rather than a wider industry thing, is people saying, well, if I'm only going to come into the office maybe 2, perhaps 3 days a week, then actually I'm prepared to commute for longer, but not to commute again to London, but to commute from a really nice place So I'm prepared to live a bit further away, make my money go further. But then it's really interesting, the feedback we've got. The distance that people are prepared to walk at the end is very short. So they're actually prepared to commute quite a long way on a train, but then actually when they get off the train in central Birmingham or central London or wherever, they certainly don't want to get a tube beyond that. So actually Birmingham as a hub could become quite an interesting place, because people can get trains in from all sorts of places, and then actually you can walk to your very high quality office space in the city centre with this great environment. So I think those sort of three things, the change in behaviours, the increase potentially in regional hubs, and then making Birmingham itself a sort of hub for these interesting and dynamic offices. If we capture all of this, this could actually be quite good news for Birmingham.
Thanks, Anne. That's really interesting, because I think as the dust settles, what is apparent, and very much so in what you've just said, and touching on what Andy said earlier, is that connectivity is going to be needed more than ever to attract people to our region and into our cities. And I think that the HS2 and the Metro projects are great examples of how we can do this, and I think also promoting alternatives to public transport. So we've had traditional cycling for a long time, but we're starting to see a rise in electric bikes, and I think we're going to see for the better the public realm around us transform in the years to come. So yeah, some interesting comments there from everybody. So I'll move on to the next question, and again, Anne, if you could take this question, could the crisis be the wake-up call that the construction sector needs to fully embrace technology and new ways of working? And does the skills shortage still present the same threat as it did pre-COVID-19?
Okay, so far as the wake-up call is concerned, I mean, an unequivocal yes. I mean, we've had sort of wake-up calls before, but this one is definitely 3 alarm clocks all ringing at the same time. We've already seen that the companies, and PwC is a great example, the companies that were already digitally enabled are the ones that are surviving the best, and the companies that didn't have that level of sort of digital capability are the ones that have struggled, and that will only accelerate in my view. And I'm not just talking about professional services companies. I mean, actually the building process itself, can you have digital design for manufacture? What's going to be the impact of off-site construction? What's going to be the impact of really advanced logistics, and rather than weekly planning, sort of minute by minute planning in terms of construction sites, and this, all of which can be enabled by use of digital technologies that we just couldn't have done before. So certainly in terms of the ways that we work, the companies that are innovative, the companies that seize this as a challenge but potentially an opportunity, are the ones that are going to come out of it best. That does feed directly into the skills challenge though, because of course it might mean that you can do the same amount of work but with a different type of workforce. So it might be that we actually need to attract different types of people, or retrain our existing people, or indeed, somebody was saying to me yesterday, maybe take some of the people from the industries that will struggle more and use some of their skills to feed into construction. So things like manufacturing are highly skilled in logistics and just in time and that type of thing. But secondly, again, looking at it from a Birmingham perspective, I actually think that one of the risks to Birmingham is not necessarily a local skills shortage per se. It could be a skills drain, because what we're actually seeing in London at the moment, and again, I'm part of a global business, is that London has lost already quite a lot of its construction workers. They were overseas workers that went home at the beginning of the coronavirus crisis and maybe won't return. And with sort of any restrictions on migration or whatever that we might see in the sort of post-Brexit environment, that might become more problematic. And I think that in the West Midlands, we will be so connected to the south that I think we will become almost like a poaching ground, if you like, for companies down there. So I think we've got to be a bit careful about this. So really what we've got to do is promote why the West Midlands is such a great place to work, the opportunities, the quality of life here. And from a construction point of view, the phenomenal opportunities that this industry will have, both as an economic generator and as a great place to work. So, yes, there will be challenges, but I don't think they're insurmountable.
That's great, and thanks very much. And Andy, would you like to offer a view on that?
Yes, just two things I think to put in. The first thing, I want actually to build on something that Anne has just mentioned, because one of the more original ideas in this paper that we did yesterday for government was to address exactly what Anne talked about taking the intellectual property, brilliantly skilled people from probably manufacturing sector, where engineers, for example, will probably be being shaken out of companies. You've already seen the Rolls-Royce news, for example, and putting them into like a fund where their expertise would be available, not lost, to help SMEs in the supply chains, and the construction sector would definitely be a beneficiary of that. We gave the whole concept, the title, Operation Paperclip. I'll let the historians look up why. It's slightly contentious title, I will admit. But there was I think, a really interesting idea there about as the shape of the economy changes, let's not lose some of the most skilled and able people, but think about how we can actually redeploy them. And this is a process that the Warwick Manufacturing Group will be stepping forward to help us lead, actually. So it's interesting that Anne picked that up. I doubt whether you'd read our piece, but that was interesting. And then, of course, the other thing that's not been mentioned is digital skills. Now, this would apply almost whichever sector we were talking about, but and I don't just mean the basic digital skills, I mean the applied piece, the fact that every architect, every designer, every quantity surveyor will be using new methods, the whole 5G piece, the criticality of the full fibre stuff. That is another area that we know we have got to invest in, the infrastructure and the skills around. And if you look at what's been happening, even during the heart of the pandemic, the number of people applying for roles on our national digital retraining schemes is vastly beyond the capacity that we have. So we do have to really step up that skill element as well.
Thanks, Andy, and thanks to everybody for their input. I'm just conscious of time, so let's move on to some of the questions from the audience. Just running my eyes down the questions, there seems to be a common theme here around manufacturing and off-site construction. So I'll pick one. So this current crisis could be a reset button to allow manufacturing to be strengthened within the region, bolstering up the supply chain for the construction industry. Has there been any thought, or is there anything being done to help regenerate this industry? Andy, can I point that one at you?
Yeah, it depends a bit what you mean. Do you mean within core manufacturing sectors as there already are? Because the answer to that is categorically yes. This whole question of reshoring, the vulnerability of supply chains over long distance with political interference, that is definitely an opportunity for us. And one of the things we've got to do is think about how we enable SMEs who are to take advantage of that trend. So definitely, if what you mean is this an opportunity, and this is where I think we were going in the question before last, is this an opportunity for thinking about different construction supply chains and actually finally making something of this idea, as it's called, modern methods of construction, and the concept of the off-site construction capability? The answer to that is it's embryonic, but and it's a very, very fragmented industry across the West Midlands at the moment. I think there is a real opportunity to pull it together and to try to actually pitch to do something of national significance in terms of scale of factory production, in terms of the origination of material as well, because that's the danger of this. It's actually very import dependent at the moment. So there are two different takes on your questions, both of which I think are very fertile ground for us, and the thinking is beginning. Yeah.
That's great, Andy. That's covered off a couple of questions. Rob, there's a question here which I'd ask you to answer. If this could potentially have a positive effect on the region's office sector, could other sectors also benefit?
I presume in the context of the virus. Okay, yeah. Obviously residential, and dare I say, even the struggling retail offer. I mean, obviously, I think retail what's been happening prior to the event was significant, but I think it's obviously going through that transition. But of course, if you can attract, I mean, the big deciding factor these days in terms of office location is the HR department. And I think that is all about resource and people's quality of life. So if you can attract more people into office space, and some of those Southeast people or international people, of course, what you also then need to provide is a residential development to support that. And, you know, that volume of residential and the quality of that residential needs to cover all sections across family, plus through to obviously professional services and graduates. So I think it one works in hand with the other. And of course, if you then got people living and working, it will benefit that F&B in that retail sector, because that's all about the quality of place and about having the right type of environment. So I think it's a catalyst. You know, more people you bring into the cities and town centres generates footfall, generates the need for residential, generates the need for more restaurants, pubs, cafes, and hopefully to help the retail sector in whatever new form it's going to take, which obviously we all realise, again, has probably been accelerated by the virus event with that significant change to the way that retail has to operate. So yeah, it'll benefit all.
Okay, thanks, Rob. So moving on to another question, and this person's asked for the thoughts of the panel. So in terms of a green recovery and build back better, circular economy principles and business models have the potential to bring huge positive impact economically, environmentally and socially across the region. For example, repair and remanufacture, creating new jobs, business synergies and resource maximisation. Any thoughts from the panel on this?
So I'll have a sort of a stab from possibly a theoretical level, and maybe others can talk at a practical level. So somebody said to me earlier this morning, well, you know, we've got to get to carbon neutral by 2050, which means that anything we build today actually has to be carbon neutral, because they will hopefully still be standing by 2050. And we are one of the few industries where, of course, that's true. The stuff we're manufacturing or building or putting together now, we expect it to last, you know, at least 50 years, if not some hundreds of years. And so actually a lot of the things that we talk about as future events are absolutely of the moment. So I think that's something that even if we hadn't had coronavirus, that would have been absolutely of the moment. But I think where I say I'll sort of bring it back to a theoretical level, and this is really important. Even before, not even, for years before coronavirus, government investment was always hinged on three things. It hinged upon the sort of economic case, it hinged upon the social case, and it hinged upon the environmental case. And I think that what has been lost, often in translation, if you like, certainly in the post-recession sort of period, so the period from 2008 onwards, was that all three of those should have equal weight. And what inevitably happened was everybody started concentrating on the cost, not even the economic position, because the economics isn't short term, it's long term. And what I am really, really hopeful for is that much more attention is now being spent again on these three elements. So, you know, how much will it cost, but what is the economic advantage? So, you know, the multiplier, what impact will it have on society? What impact will it have on the community? And what impact will it have on the environment? And so long as we can get that message going right from the top, so that those investment decisions are truly made on that basis, then behaviours will follow that, and you know, others will follow where, if you like, government investment leads. So I have a level of optimism about this, that it was already there, but this is definitely giving it a bit of a boost. But we don't half need to stick to our guns on this, because it will be so easy in the next year to just find ourselves embroiled in another horrendous price war, as we did after the global financial crisis. So although I'm optimistic, there is a realism that we will all need discipline on this.
Wayne, can I just pick up also just what Anne said?
Yeah,
I think I said earlier on, I think there's a very, very steep learning curve. We've just started on this track of a new building, which, if you like, that net zero carbon building. And, you know, we hope that we're going to be out in construction sometime in early 22 on this. that's a heck of a tight time frame, because who are out there, that supply chain that can provide something which is our current building that we're out on site since Christmas last year. That's going to be run as a all electric building, air source heat pumps, all the stuff that I'm sure a lot of you guys are now familiar with. But of course, the build part of it we missed. But to build something is immensely challenging when you think we just don't have the supply chain set up for it. So I think there's going to be a lot of pressure, and a very rapid turnaround in our industry needs to be to achieve it, because and that's where manufacturing is going to have to come in to look at these whole different methods of construction and obviously local supply chains. So it's going to be an interesting couple of years on that, and we're certainly very supportive, but there's also a reality check as well.
Can I just put one, you might use the word tangential, actually, one particular aspect of this, which I think is a new opportunity, and that's this whole issue of doing things locally. Now, this all sort of contributes to this issue of offices in the city centre. Are we going to have the same density of people in the city centre? And whilst I accept all of Anne's very positive observations, I think there is just an issue of how many people are going to want to be travelling into the city centre, maybe medium term. But what's definitely been one of the zeitgeists of this is I want to do my things locally. And the trend over, of course, the last 10 years has been all our local centres have been declining. And I do think that there is a real opportunity for just to rethink about the sustainability of local centres to provide more of the services that people might have thought they had to go into the city for. And I don't just mean retail, I mean the public services as well that go with that, the leisure, community activities. So I think my own bet is there is an opportunity and a theme that will be developed there, which by its very nature is much more self-contained, actually.
Thanks, Andy. I'll ask a specific question on the modern methods of construction, because there's a few questions on this. And Rob, if you wouldn't mind starting this one off, with the regional skill set in both manufacturing and construction, what are the plans to drive forward the regional capability in off-site construction and MMC? And just wondering what you've seen in the developments that you're moving forward, Rob, discussions around MMC.
I'm going to be honest, not a lot at the moment within the industry too much. I mean, we've been talking, you may have seen, we're promoting through a planning process a residential element, and we're looking at the whole method of construction around that, and looking at off-site manufacturing for pods, etc. And I think this comes back to that point, really. We are keen to do stuff. And we are really working with supply chain, working with contractors to try and move this forward to much more off-site manufacturing, but real evidence of it is not there. And I think if anything, the virus or whatever, but the carbon driver is going to make it change, because you can't just keep pouring concrete, for example, into buildings. It isn't sustainable. You can't, we've got to look at that change. But I don't know, from an ISG perspective, there's lots of investigation, probably more, to be fair, on the residential. And I think there's a lot of work that I know Midlands and the local authorities are looking at. And obviously the investment that LNG have made, the investment that Berkeley Homes have made about off-site manufacturing. You're not seeing that in offices at the moment. What you're seeing is pod systems, but that's more about quality. It's not, to be honest, about sustainability. But I think it's the thing that needs, going back to my point, there's an awful lot of living catch up to do over the next couple of years to make this thing happen.
Yeah.
About that. And I'm just being honest, there is the desire's there, but I don't think, unless I'm missing something, and it'd be interesting from your point of view, Wayne, actually putting you on the spot from ISG, but also Anne, to see if you're seeing any real evidence of that within the commercial office sector.
Not so much in the commercial office sector, but as you touched on, residential and also student accommodation, which is a sector that we're strong in. I think if you went back 3 or 4 years ago, every option was traditional construction, but there's a real desire there from customers now to do something using modern methods of construction. So optioneering's moved on now from, for example, we will look at a traditional model. We'll look at a let's say a precast model, and also modular. So we're certainly seeing an increase in interest from customers. It'll be interesting to see what the workplace will look like going forward, and whether we can start introducing MMC towards office construction.
Yeah.
I mean, interestingly, what we have seen is a couple of things on the commercial office space. We've seen where you've got really tight sites, much more of what I'd saw. I mean, it is off-site construction. It's literally off-site assembly, because actually delivering individual components to site is just so difficult that it's caused people to really think hard about how much can be built off-site. The other thing, though, bringing it back to a sort of West Midlands perspective, one really important piece of investment that it's probably not really hit the news yet because it's still in its sort of research phase, is that the Transforming Construction Challenge Fund put quite a lot of funding behind an organisation called the Construction Innovation Hub, and they're actually based at the MTC in Anstey in Coventry.
Yeah.
And what they've got 4 major projects, and one of the major projects that they're actually doing is an investigation into what they're calling the platform approach to MMC. So instead of everybody sort of starting from scratch and going, oh, so what sort of MMC shall we use this time? Because of course there's loads of different ways of doing offsite or modular or whatever. It's really trying to bring in this platform approach, which is a much more standardized component-based approach. Now, I think that over the next year or two, we will really start seeing stuff come out of there, particularly in schools, in prisons, in all levels of government procurement. And of course, if you get, government procures something like over 35% of all construction. If you start getting that massive amount of government procurement pushing down the MMC route, backed on sound research from the MTC and the Innovation Hub, then I think we could see a change sort of snowballing on the back of that.
Thanks for that, Anne. I'm going to finish. I'm going to try and combine 2 questions here, Andy, if you don't mind answering.
You're in charge, so I don't have a choice.
So the first one, which is a great question, is what can we make the West Midlands famous for as we come out of the crisis? And one thing that I think is really important that's going to happen in the next couple of years is how important are the 2022 Commonwealth Games to the region?
Yeah, okay. The second question I can do straight away and very easily, so let's just nail that one then. The other one's a bit more thoughtful. They're critical for 3 reasons. Number one, it's a big investment of cash. It's £1 billion, probably more now. It's £1 billion of public sector cash, actually. There'll then be all the private sector investment that goes around it to make the most of the commercial opportunities. And if you look, I think there's 6 cranes on the skyline in Perry Bar now. It's actually really exhilarating. And if you think of the multiplier that Anne talked about there, it's actually a really fortunate thing for us. The second reason it's really critical is there will be opportunities for those young people who face those incredible youth unemployment numbers to participate in something, if not as an employee, and something I'm very pleased about. We've already got our construction training hubs in Perry Bar in Coventry for their equivalent, the City of Culture. So there's opportunities there. But actually, even if it's just about volunteering and getting a basic skill through that, there will be a self-development opportunity, as well as, frankly, a wonderful opportunity to do something that's going to make us feel good. But the third reason it's critical is it's a wonderful showcase. And in the small print just before COVID, we secured another important piece of cash from government, which is hardly sexily titled. We call it Commonwealth Games Tourism, Trade and Investment, TTI. But it's basically about using the Commonwealth Games to run a big business promotion series of activities. We were going to be starting this year at World Expo. That's been cancelled, but there'll be other things. But it is a fantastic opportunity to promote West Midlands businesses. So in all sorts of ways, the timing is better is even more important now than it looked pre-COVID, because it gives us an opportunity for bounce back. And then if you ask me what the West Midlands can be famous for, now I could choose lots of individual examples, but I think actually I'll try, and this might sound therefore a bit soft, but I think it's right. And I think it's actually about reinvention. And this region's been famous for that over many economic downturns in the past, but we've always bounced back. Nobody, least of all me, would have wanted the sort of huge challenge that we now face. But I genuinely believe that if we work together, work innovatively, we can bounce back in a dramatic way again. And that's the story that we want people to write about us in years to come.
That's great. Thanks, Andy. So I'll just bring this discussion to a close, and thanks to everybody for attending today's webinar, and a big thank you to our panelists for providing such a thought-provoking discussion. As we all know, the next few months will prove vital when it comes to determining the future of our region. The decisions we make now will in many ways determine what the West Midlands recovery looks like, and it's up to us to make sure that we take this opportunity to reflect on what has happened, not just since the start of the virus, but for a number of years in the sector, and work out how we can make things better. As I said at the start, we've been recording this session and it will be available to you soon. We'll also be following up with those who pre-registered for the event. So if you do have any burning questions that we couldn't get through on the session, or if you're interested in furthering the discussion, we'd love to hear from you, and please do drop me a line. Thanks again to our three panelists, Andy, Anne and Rob. These discussions are and will continue to be so important moving forward here in the Midlands. So thank you very much for your support, and hope we can get to meet face to face very soon. So take care everybody, and all the very best. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Wayne. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Cheers everyone. Bye-bye.